This conference is also intergenerational, and we are very honoured to have our pioneers who began some of this anti-nuclear movement. So we have Suzanne, Auntie Suze, who is going to, and look, we're very blessed to have all of you here, but thank you for your support. Yeah.
Tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou katoa, ngā mihi mahana ki a tātou katoa. So my name is Suzanne Menzies-Culling, contrary to what's on your program, and it's my very great honour today to introduce to you the keynote speaker for this conference, Hilda Halkyard-Harawira. Hilda, in spite of her size, is one of the giants of 20th century activism and solidarity in Te Moana Nui a Kiwa, the great Pacific Ocean. She was born the eldest child of a Te Rarawa, Tiapori, Ngāti Whātua mother and an English father, and grew up in South Auckland, a community of Maori and Pacifica families during the 60s and 70s. She attended Hillary College in Otara and went on to study at the University of Auckland. Hilda is a daughter, sister, wife, mother, grandmother and great-grandmother. She's an activist, a visionary leader, a kaiako teacher, a wahine toa, a kai hoi, a champion exponent of waka ama. Hilda is also one of several Māori women who've been my teachers and someone, excuse me, I'm privileged to call a friend. She has a reputation for commitment, integrity and fearlessness when it comes to fighting for the rights of her people and for the Indigenous people of the Pacific. Over the years, she's been very active in many organisations, fighting against racism, fighting for Māori rights and the honouring of Te Tīti o Waitangi. As a young woman, she joined a lot of organisations that were activist organisations such as Ngā Tamatoa, the Waitangi Action Committee, Māori People's Liberation Movement, and He Taua. Now, He Taua was a group of students who came from Auckland University and from Auckland, South Auckland and other parts of Auckland, and they challenged the racist practices of the engineering students at the University of Auckland. And there's a famous photo that if you do your research, you'll find of a very small Māori woman standing cheek by jowl in front of a great big lanky white guy who's dressed up in a plastic raffia skirt and woolly wig and has lewd slogans and symbols on it painted on him. And every year the engineering students used to do a parody of Kamati. And so this particular year, Hilda and other students had enough, although the university, many people in the university have been asking the students not to do this. They said it was tradition. We don't take long to build traditions in the Pākehā world, maybe 3 or 4 years it becomes a tradition. So this photo of Hilda, she's right there telling this guy to stop it. And anyway, as a consequence of her actions and others in He Taua, that haka, that parody never happened again. That was, I think, about 1979. In 1978, she was one of over 200 people who were arrested at the occupation of Takaparaho, West End Point. And in the 70s and 80s, as part of the Auckland network, she was a member of the Black Women's Movement. Hilda was also one of the founders of PNAC, Pacific People's Anti-Nuclear Action Committee, based in Otara, working on the kaupapa of a nuclear-free and independent Pacific. It was PNAC that hosted the first of a number of Te Hui Oranga o Te Moana Nui a Kiwa at Tātou Hono Marae in Tamaki Makaurau in 1983. These hui brought international manuhiri from all around the Pacific, activists from Kanaki, Tahiti, Hawaii, First Nations people from the Great Turtle Island, and from Australia, who came to share their stories with tangata whenua and others here in Aotearoa. And there are a number of these Te Hui Oranga that were held, some in Auckland, some here in Ōtepoti, hosted by another group, a sister organisation to PNAC called Te Whānau Matariki, which I was a member of. In the mid-1980s, Hilda and her husband Honi left Auckland and took their children back home to Te Kao in the north, the far north, Te Taitokoro. This returning to their ancestral lands was part of a move back home made by quite a number of young people at this time who were inspired to reverse the urbanisation of Māori whānau that had depopulated rural communities after World War II. So as a member of PNAC, Hilda had attended a number of conferences in the Pacific that were focused on ridding the region of all nuclear activity by major powers. And by the time she made her move north, she was the regional rep for the region of Aotearoa and Australia. And she had become the secretary for the International Steering Committee of the Pacific Concerns Resource Centre, known as the PCRC. And all this was with 4 or 5 children, and a place with no electricity or running water, but which did have a phone that was attached to a tree. So that's how she ran the Secretariat of the Nuclear Free and Independent Pacific Movement for quite a time. In 1986, the Nuclear Free Independent Pacific Steering Committee meeting was held at Onamarai in Takao, attended by activists from Palau, Fiji, Hawaii Nei, Tahiti Nui, Tonga, and Aotearoa. And the following year, Hilda was awarded the Peace Prize by the Danish Peace Foundation for her work as the Secretary of the International Committee of the PCRC. And in 1990, Hilda was responsible for bringing the Nuclear Free Independent Pacific movement to Aotearoa, where we were hosted by her people at Whangape in the far north. Hilda and Honi eventually moved from Takao to Kaitaia, and there she was able to begin the work in Māori education that she is well known for today. It was there in Kaitaia that the two of them established Kaitaia's first kohanga reo, and later Te Kura Kaupapa o Te Rangi Aniwaniwa and Te Wānanga o Te Rangi Aniwaniwa, where she is presently the Kai Whakahaere, which for those of you who don't speak Māori means the mover and shaker. Hilda is also a long-standing member of Te Kawariki, and one of the mentor of Te Kawariki was Reverend Māori Marsden, whose photo was up earlier. They were a group of young activists from the north, and in 1989 they arranged to hold a competition to design a distinctive Māori flag, which is now known as the Tino Rangatiratanga flag. It was unveiled at Waitangi on the 6th of February 1990, the 150th anniversary of the initial signing of Te Titi o Waitangi. Not content with all this year she ventured into the stormy waters of local body politics, and in October was elected to the Far North District Council to represent the Ngatai o Tokiro Māori ward. Through all this time, Hilda has been steadfast in her solidarity with the tangata whenua of the Pacific, who are still engaged in the struggle to decolonise, in particular Hawaii Nei and Tahiti Nui. I know she'll be feeling cross that I've singled her out for attention like this, as she will always insist that she didn't do this on her own, but I'm equally certain that the people she worked alongside for all these years will be pleased that her work is being properly acknowledged. We are so honoured to have her here with us. So please welcome Marae Kura Hilda Halkyard-Harawira.
There's a million stories to tell that aren't here. There, with all the countries that are present and everything, but what I like about that waiata is that we liberated it from Kanaki and put our own words to it. And my girl tells me that other countries made up the words to that. Or namahi, that's my little rose I found outside. It's very pretty. Sign of life and beauty and smell of roses. Anyhow, what do I do? Which one do I push? Sorry? There we go. Anyhow, I'm just going to give you a little, 1/1000th of the story. And it's unfinished because I started it yesterday, and I'm not making excuses, but I'm a busy woman, and I'm old, and I can't multitask anymore, and I do one thing at a time, and I'm okay about that. I can't have 2 conversations going at once. Anyhow, this is our family in Otara. Whenua's over there in the middle. And I think I've been an activist for 50 years of my life, from the age of 16 when we started fighting for our reo Māori. But I wanted to show this because we had a young family in Otara, and our activism happened after hours, after work. after hours, after looking after the kids. And yeah, and I just wanted to say that because some people have this view that it's just, dole people on the dole who are activists, but actually it's a lifetime commitment you can't even walk away from. And there's many others. This is, we have a multi-generational whānau at our place, 4 to 5 generations on our land. We sold a house in Otara and bought 6 acres up north, and we're trying to get a papakainga housing built for our whānau. But, oh, what a process. But anyhow, these are just the teenagers, so I have to break up the age groups when we go out. And yeah, just to make sure that we connect with our mokopuna. Oh, yeah. And here's some of the younger ones. So we have, when we do occasions, it's splitting the age groups. But if you want to stay really sane, you take one at a time. I really wanted to talk about our whanaungatanga, that we have connections that we don't even know about. And I mistakenly thought Te Reo Māori was 2,000 years old, but it's older. The other day we had a kōrero by Ririata Mākiha in our council meeting, which is really radical. Our new Māori mayor invited Ririata, who talks about the Māramataka, the Māori calendar. And he placed with scientific evidence as well that Nuku Tawhiti, one of the captains of the canoes that came to the far north, arrived mid-September 1054. So, I mean, that was just wonderful. But this mahi of navigation, and I like saying this stuff, is that, you know, Māori and Pacifica people were traversing the oceans long before Jesus Christ was born. So our history goes way back. Sometimes colonizers think our history started with the birth of Jesus Christ. Well, it didn't. So these are 2 waka from the north, built by one of our kaumātua, and part of the International Pacific rebirth of navigating, which we learned from somebody in Micronesia, Maupialong, and he taught the Hawaiians, and now that's a big movement going around the Pacific. So the first Nuclear Free Pacific conference that we knew about was in Suva. Google can't find some of our people. Never ever trust the information on Google. It's very limited, and I would say sometimes plastic. So a really influential man at the time, Doug Sinclair, the father of Roimata Kirikiri, he was at that conference, and his children, Roimata and Manu Sinclair, were very influential in a lot of things. Somebody was talking about they got motivated by a teacher when they were wagging. Same. I was motivated by Doug Sinclair's daughter while I was wagging outside a class once, and she told me Māori never got to varsity. So that's my mother-in-law, and she was at the first conference with Doug. Oh, yeah, what am I doing? Might have been in the second conference, they had said that there had to be some Indigenous reps the next time. So it was myself and Liz Marsden. These are a couple of the people I met there. Solly on the left was the cook, but he was also involved in the land struggles all around Hawaii, and Haunani K. Trask, who became a really well-known feminist leader of Hawaiian culture, and she's admired today by multi-generations, a bit like that Supreme Court judge in America. She has that same sort of mana in the Pacific. And we learned about Aloha Aina, the kaupapa of Aloha Aina, love for the land, Hawaiian sovereignty with the queen, the Hawaiian queen that was deposed. Oh, sorry. So at this conference, there were like 2 competing views, not competing, but 2 separate kind of views. One was about Aloha Aina, and the other one was about militarization of islands where military bases had set up. And as a result of military bases, a lot of stuff happened, you know, people got homes, jobs for military people. And I've seen it in Tahiti as well, that the military get nice homes and salaries and perks. But then there's an issue of storing nuclear weapons, you know, so it's stored in Hawaii. Then there's a bit of an issue about, well, where do you dump sort of waste? And there was a plan to drop it in the Marianas Trench. And if you've got a military base, well, you've got to have a military practice. So they started up the RIMPAC at Kaho'olawe, where they invited people from around the Pacific to bomb an island. And the other thing about when these superpowers come into the Pacific, you automatically become a nuclear target. And guess what? Who lives there? Pacific Island people. And I think down the one about Below, the story that was had about Below, I don't know whether it was Below or Palau, who had the first nuclear-free constitution, whether it was Below or Vanuatu Below. At the time, you know, the Americans were offering, and there's always big offers of money, which, you know, is really hard for people to turn down. A 50-year lease for 15 years funding. So, you know, it's all those kind of rip-offs. And at our conference, I met this woman's, a well-known speaker there, Darlene Keju, who started talking about, you know, not only the nuclear test, but the impact it had on the bodies of people. And, you know, jellyfish babies, and there was an interpreter there. Another person was speaking and the interpreter wouldn't interpret properly because they didn't want to talk about the horrific stories of what was happening to these babies. But at one conference, Darlene says, "Sister, come and I show you what's wrong with me." And she pulled up her top and she had all these golf ball size lumps all over her body as a result of this radiation testing and the long-term effects that it left on the people and still does. She has now passed away, but her husband, Giff, has written a lot of stories. And I suppose what I'm really bringing up Giff's name for is the value of having us working together at different levels, Indigenous. You know, I used to think some of these Pākehās were just really nerds. Well, I met another one today who is really helpful with Cinna Brown over there. And, you know, there's real usefulness, but there's also, as long as there's observed codes of ethics and tikanga so that everyone's safe and people don't get carried away and thinking it's about, I become famous. So I met Darlene, and that's how, imagine we know nothing. I go there for the Treaty of Waitangi and then I hear all these stories, and that was only one story. There's thousands more. Hello. You quoted it, no one is free until everyone is free. Walter Leni was one of the, kind of a famous man in the Pacific. One, because he was from Vanuatu. Two, they had managed to throw the French and the British out. But also he had this real strong commitment to supporting small Pacific nations, like you said, in Melanesia, but right across. And he used to come down and meet with Maturata and other Māori MPs to try and advance the cause of other Pacific nations before they got to the South Pacific Forum. And, you know, Ripeka Evans, Ma and Donna Aotearoa, but he was a really open person and really into supporting little nations to get status on the United Nations decolonization list. And Hilda Leni, we were called the two Hildas. And she was a minister of something over there, but yeah, oops. And here's another one, Jan Selene Urugay, and he talked about Kanak independence, and he'd come with his suitcase, very much a gentleman, but he was always trying to get Kanaki onto the UN decolonization list. And, you know, I saw these fellas being turned away. turned away always by Australia and New Zealand, but also by other Pacific nations. And that's why Big Brother Tuakana, people like Walter Lini and some of the nations are really important to get people over the line. And here are some friends. In 1986, Kanaki was reinscribed on the UN list. This Susanna Unei, who stayed here in Aotearoa, and also Louis Urugay. Both have passed away since. Backing up on that picture, I remember that there was a big Wakaama World Sprints being held at Kanaki, and some of us boycotted going because 19 people had been killed at that time. They were killed by the French military who were just trying to shut down the movement. And of course, at our first conference, the beautiful Te Ushon was there, and one other person who I can't remember, but they were talking, well, at the time, Charlie Shing was in jail for toto tupuna, but you know, the whole kaupapa about nuclear testing come up, and then we had Marie and Bengt Danielson, who wrote the book Morirua Mano Mo, and sort of was able to conscientise a lot of French speakers about what was happening by the French government in you know, in Tahiti. And then there was all these terrible tests that these French government had to perfect, and they didn't give a stuff. They didn't give a shit that it killed Indigenous people. I went to an anniversary 40 years after this, and some New Zealand scientists were saying that, you know, it was more than cancer, how people were affected. There were, you know, impacts on children being born in DNA. And of course, Oscar Tamaru has been quite well known. And here's this little other guy, Nick McClellan. He was one of these little Australian nerds. Well, what I see is he's still the one who keeps us all updated on what's happening in the Pacific. And I'm thinking, gee, I wouldn't know if somebody hadn't written that. And you sort of have to trust his perspective a bit, because he's had that long-term relationship with, you know, the Indigenous independence movements, because if you get it wrong, they're going to dump you. So that's that working relationship between all of us, networking. And this was a big take. I don't know what year it came to our conference. But it was East Timor. And on the right, you have Ramos Hota, who lived in exile 24 years. Just imagine that. I'm sure he was a Catholic priest. I don't know, but was he? No, he wasn't. Oh, I don't know why I thought he was. But you know, he lived 24 years in exile, just going around the world talking about the liberation of East Timor from Indonesia, and how their leader, Zananau Gusmao, was locked up in jail, and eventually they gained independence, but it was still a bloody battle, and many people were killed in a Dili massacre. But, you know, these are some of our members of the NFIP movement. Some stories have good endings, some are unfinished endings. And West Papua, Rex Rumakek was part of the Pacific Concerns Resource Centre, and many others. And I know Grace Melissa's son, Pala, is very supportive, following that tradition of Walter, to make sure that, you know, there's that inter-Melanesian support. So one of the things is, so these are all random thinking. Colonisation, you know, some people were talking about nuclear tests, but actually how it impacted on Indigenous people was was the loss of our land, the white supremacy, and they call it the doctrine of discovery. Anything that is out there, you know, when the colonists I like that term from, I heard a term that was used in a couple of countries. Colonisation is described as when white men come along. And all of the stuff that people thought that they had, just because there were natives there, they were, you know, less than human. Therefore, that's our land. We'll just seize that land. We'll seize this. We'll stop this. We'll, etc., etc. And the key thing that Darlene and a whole lot of other people said was that in the Pacific, we are the nuclear guinea pigs. And there's major health, eternal destruction that will never be fixed. Some places where there's been, you know, tests, they're unlivable, uninhabitable for over 24,000 years. It'll never go away. Radiation doesn't disappear. So in 1983, a radical shift happened in Vanuatu. They wrote, I've just summarised the things, the People's Charter, and they changed it from nuclear free and added an independent Pacific. A big difference. The whole world can be anti-nuclear, but it doesn't mean those same people will support the independence and the decolonisation in the rest of in the Pacific. And they used to always say, if it is safe, test it in Paris or New York. Why test it on us? And that's one of the tests in Bravo in the Marshall Islands. And these same kōrero, we only want to borrow the things from Western culture that are good for us, but we want to control our own destinies. We don't need someone telling us what to do or trying to fit us into a straitjacket. Acknowledging racism and, you know, there's a lot of danger from transnational corporations. I'll give you an example. 2025 is the year that my husband's part of this anti-smoking legislation. 2025, we will stop the sale of tobacco in Aotearoa. And we are so addicted to it as a people, our people are dying from it, but these are murderers who benefit from the death of regular people, but they have so much money, so they've reverted to vaping, which is just as, if you understand what I'm trying to say, transnational corporations. And I've got Jean Chibal and Grace Melissa up there, and just to acknowledge the writings of people, artwork, whatever. So the PCRC, we call it, I don't know how long it went, but we divided, these are the 5 main campaigns that we had to dedicate our work towards. So all of those: demilitarization, decolonisation, environment, human rights and good governance, and sustainable human development. We had all these little newsletters going out around, right around the world, keeping us all informed. Oh, gee, I don't know how long it went for, a long time. And so I suppose I really wanted to say that, you know, we survived on being creative, not just following an acceptable track. One of the things I've learned as a Maori activist, you never get in the front door. So sometimes you've got to go through the side door, and all of these things that we had to do, slogans, aloha aina, land rights with the Aboriginal flag, flotilla that went to Morurua, Whangatauwha, flotilla that are used up here in Aotearoa, you know, with the Russian rich guy up north. They sort of sailed around it. Protests are always useful, submissions, article updates by our comrades who write what we want to be written. Die-ins. I went to my first die-in in 1980, where you lay down on the ground and pretended you were dead. acted like we did marches, and one was a fish throw, like dropping fish, rotting fish outside some of the embassies to protest nuclear testing and what it was doing to humans. Artwork, there's some stunning art, and why I like that waiata at the beginning was that our young people hear the messages differently. They don't want to come to anything like this. I probably wouldn't want to come to any of these anymore, but thank you for inviting me. But they like art, waiata, one of that song that Whenua put up, I call them signposts. They signpost an action that happened. If a song was written, like I can talk about lots and lots of songs that you know as a signpost to that legislation that was really bad for us. Anyone got an example? What's a song that came out at a, yeah, okay. Wānanga Taiao, those are, you know, environmental, put back into Papatuanuku days, planting trees, cleaning natural sites, flags of independence, flags of sovereignty. So that young woman up there, that was one of a photo that Nick McClellan put up about a young Pacific voice talking out, you know, for the climate change week this year. And that's my mokopuna, Maioha, when she was young, and we used the backdrop of that photo about stop deep sea mining. So it was very hard, and it is very hard in the NFIP movement, because in Aotearoa people don't see nuclear. So we sort of went back into our own struggles, really, and you got to do what you got to do in your own backyard, actually. And it's about recovering and reconstructing the simple things. It could be a family, it could be your language. So Te Reo Māori has been a big struggle. In our council meetings, we have 4 Māori MPs and a Māori mayor, and I just said, look, I feel comfortable speaking Māori. Can you get some translation thingies so that we can speak Māori, and we don't want to translate, sorry. So these are some of my students on a hikoi. These are some, I knew I was going to be finishing at school this year, so did some, whatever you call them, posters to put up on the wall that kids could see the true history instead of learning. Some people talk crap about our history, so if you want somebody to learn your history properly, you have to really construct it so it doesn't go titaha, upside down, or get a narrative you can't even understand. It's wrong. Really enjoyed your kōrero at the beginning, Matua. Really enjoyed it. It was a good prelude to this. Yeah, and so Māori, but you can't do this all the time, and that's a signpost. That's a signpost not only for 2004, but later. This sign is up on our on my school wall, and so we've been donated flags from all around. The first one was Cuba, and we just had a Polynesian Cup basketball tournament, so we got a whole bunch of flags because they wanted to beat each other. But those are signposts of a particular era and a particular legislation. And this is somewhere where we're going. And it may not be the total answer, but the Constitution of Aotearoa, we believe, needs to reflect he whakaputanga me te treaty o Waitangi. I never had time, I ran out of time, but on the side there we have Ngā Tamatoa and the Polynesian Panthers. There's something missing in there. Sorry, I couldn't find it. I ran out of time. It was the anti-racism movement. And in the 70s, we all worked together on the Dawn Raids. There was one we called the Pacific Island Group, which was, the acronym was PIG Patrol, Pacific Island Groups. But we would go and follow the cops to see what they were doing when they were arresting people and writing it down. My mother-in-law used to say she had, like, the Pākehās had flash cars. Oh, some Pākehās had flash cars, and they would sit in the back and write the notes, and then the two square lawyers would sit up the front, and the cops would never arrest them because they had a flash car and they had two Pākehā guys up the front. They didn't see the two Māori women sitting in the back writing the notes. And if you ever watch the Polynesian Panthers little show, what are those programs they just had? They were really hard case. But so there were three kind of movements working. Now here today we've got Asians for Tino Rangatiratanga. The anti-racism movement is still as strong. I trust them when there's any decolonisation workshops, treaty workshops, to work with Pākehā, because it's very difficult trying to talk about those things with, we all get on defensive and reactive. So it's better that, hand that over. Anyhow, be quiet. And last year we got invited to a number of us to speak to support Te Ao Māori again. And we'll come if we're asked and if it's productive. And so I suppose this thing is, oh, maybe that's the end. Must be. I suppose the end is it's not over. And so the challenge is for younger ones to pick it up, run with it, and do it differently, do it that way. Some of these things have not been won. And then just haere tonu. So the NFIP story isn't over. I look forward to you supporting it in whatever way you have. I haven't been able to say anything really transformational for you, but whatever. Get out of it what you get out of it. And mihi to all our manuhiri who come from the Pacific. Lovely to have you here and share your stories. And those of you who organise it, it's very admirable. You've got a whole lot of campaigns in this short time. Mai kia ora kia koutou.